When you move to the Netherlands, contracts aren't necessarily explained, which is why a lot of expats get caught off guard. People think once they get hired, they are set, they're good to go. But what they don't realize is your contract type could matter more than the job itself. You could be sitting next to someone, same desk, same manager, same job. And your situation could be completely different because there are 5 types of contracts. You have your permanent contract, you have your temporary contract, you have your 0-hour contract, you have your freelance contract, and you have your agency contract. And most people, they never ask which one they signed. They just focus on getting in the door, which makes sense until later when you realize one contract gives you stability, one gives you flexibility, one comes with risk, and one technically means you don't even work for the company you're sitting in. This is why WRAC always say, don't just chase the job, understand what you're signing. Because understanding this can prevent a lot of confusion later. And most people only learn this when they're already in the job. Later this week, we're going to go through the 5 contract types so you know what to look for before signing anything. Earlier this week, I mentioned the 5 contract types in the Netherlands. So let's actually break those down because this is where most people get confused. First is the permanent contract. This is what most people want: stability, long-term, benefits. The second contract type is a temporary contract, which usually has an end date, and there are certain rules around how many of these you can get before things have to change. The third contract type is the 0-hour contract. This means that they call you when they need you. Some people like the flexibility, some folks don't like that uncertainty. The fourth contract type is agency work. This is where most expats start. You may work at a company, but technically you work for the agency. And the fifth contract type is freelance or ZZP. You have more freedom, but you also have more responsibility. Taxes, insurance, everything is on you. Now, none of these are good or bad by themselves. What matters is that you understand what you're accepting. And this is why at Rights, Resumes, and Connections, we always say, getting hired is step 1, but understanding your position is step 2. Next, we'll talk about the rules most expats don't realize started the day they signed their contract. All right, guys, so last time we talked about the 5 contract types. Now let's talk about the rules most expats don't realize already started. Now, if you're on a temporary contract in the Netherlands, there's usually a limit, 3 contracts or 3 years, but something has got to change. After that contract, you are either offered a permanent role or the contract must end. And a lot of people don't realize that that clock is running. They just keep renewing contracts and thinking that everything is fine. So one day HR calls you up and say that contract won't continue. And you didn't even know that was a possibility. Now, this isn't about being negative. It's about understanding how the timelines work here. Because when you understand the timeline, you can prepare instead of react. This is why at WRAC we always say, don't just pay attention to your role, pay attention to the timelines. Because what happens next is usually based on what you knew before. Next, we'll talk about something else most expats don't fully understand: probation periods, and why your first months matter more than you think. Hey guys, so last time we talked about contract timelines here in the Netherlands. So today, let's talk about something else that matters early: probationary periods. Almost every contract in the Netherlands have one. Think of it as a trial period. This is the time where both sides can decide it makes sense for both of us to continue working together, or this ain't working out, so we're gonna go ahead and cut the rope and go ahead our separate ways. For a permanent contract, that timeline can be up to 2 months or 60 days. For shorter contracts, it may be a month or 30 days. And some short contracts don't allow probationary periods at all. But don't focus on the time frame. Focus on what that period actually is, what that time frame actually means. Because during that probationary period, either side can end this contract, which means that your first months matter more than you realize. And this is usually the time where companies decide, does this person actually fit in here? which is why at Rights, Resumes, and Connections, we say getting the job is step one. Proving your fit is the next step, because most career decisions, they don't happen in the interview. They happen after you start. Last time we talked about probationary periods. Well, today we're going to talk about how termination works. So it's not as simple as you're fired here in the Netherlands. There's usually 3 paths a company in the Netherlands will have to take in order to fire or terminate someone. We have the WRAC, which is usually where someone is getting laid off or they have a long-term sickness, so they have to go through the process. Next is through the court. So if someone has misconduct, performance issues, you have to go to court to let them go. Or a mutual agreement, which is also very common. That's where both sides agree to end their contract, sometimes even with compensation. What surprises a lot of expats is this. Employers usually have to show a reason for termination, and there's a process behind it. This is why documentation here matters more than people think. And another reason why here at Rights, Resumes, and Connections, we say your interview gets you hired, but your behavior, your communication, that keeps you employed. Next, we'll talk about something else most expats don't realize. The protections, all the things that are put in place to protect employees. Hi guys, so earlier this week we had a conversation. I want to bring it back and I want to talk a little bit about how a lot of employees, expats, don't realize here in the Netherlands the kind of protections that are in place for you. For example, if you're sick long term, employers usually continue paying a portion of your salary. There are required vacation days, holiday allowances, notice periods, severance structures in place, and rules around discrimination. Now, none of this means problems don't happen, but it does mean that there is some kind of structure. And what matters most is knowing what applies to you, because protections only help if you know that they exist. Which is why at Rights, Resumes, and Connections, we say understand your environment, because it's a part of managing your career. You know, working in a new country isn't just about finding work. It's about understanding the system you're working inside of. Next, we'll talk about something called the CAO agreement, or the CAO, because many expats are covered by them, and you don't even realize this. All right, guys, so last time we talked about employees' protection. Today we're going to talk about the CAO. The CAO is basically an industry agreement that sets up rules for how much you get paid, how many hours you work a week, what kind of benefits and vacation you'll receive. And here's what surprises a lot of people. You don't always have to be in a union for this to apply to you. If the company you're working for falls under that industry agreement, you may already be covered, which means your contract may not always show you everything you're entitled to. And most people never check this. They just assume what's in their contract is the full picture, but sometimes it isn't. Which is why at WRAC we say your contract is one document, but your work environment, well, that's the bigger picture. Because understanding both helps you understand your actual position. Next, we'll talk about the organizations involved in the Dutch work system, because this is another area most expats aren't familiar with. Hey guys, so last time we talked about the CAO. Now let's talk about something many expats hear about but may not fully understand. The organizations involved in the Dutch employment systems. For example, we talked about the UWV, the UWV. This organization is involved with unemployment benefits and some termination processes. The labor court, now this system handles certain employment disputes. We have worker councils and larger organizations that focuses on representing employees internally, and industry groups connected to the CAO. Now, you may not interact with these every day, but they are part of the structure around your employment. And understanding the structure helps you understand how decisions happen. Because as we know, every country has their system. And when you understand the system, work becomes easier to navigate. Which is why at Rights, Resumes, and Connections, we say understanding the rules of your environment is part of managing your career. Because as we say, careers aren't just built on skills now. They're built on understanding how things actually work. And I've said this before. Now we'll start pulling all of this together in our next video and talk about how expats can approach their careers strategically in the Netherlands. Hey guys, so after everything we've covered, let's talk about where expats usually get caught off guard working here in the Netherlands. And it's not because they're not capable, it's just because they don't know the system yet. Now, a few patterns that I've been seeing over the past few months is expats focusing only on getting hired instead of understanding their contract types. I've seen a few not focusing on timelines and have been caught off guard at a sudden end of their contract versus being offered a permanent role. A lot of times people have been assuming things work the same way as it does in their own country, and that is just not the case. And they're not asking questions because they don't want to seem difficult. And another thing I see is problems arising before we are doing research or understanding how to navigate that before it even got to this point here. So most of this isn't about skill. It's just about understanding the environment you're in, which is why at Rights, Resumes, and Connections, we say your career is not just about what you can do. It's about how well you can understand where you work. Because when you understand both, you make better decisions. Next, we'll wrap this series up by talking about how expats can approach their careers more strategically here in the Netherlands. If you are an expat working in the Netherlands, this is the mindset that usually helps people navigate things better. Number one, treat your career here like you're learning a new system, because you are. Pay attention to structure. Ask questions early. Understand your contract. Understand your timelines. Understand expectations. Most people only focus on performance. But performance plus understanding is what usually makes things easier to navigate. Which is why at Rights, Resumes, and Connections, we always say careers grow faster when you understand both your role and your environment. Because working in a new country isn't just about adapting your skills. It's about learning how things actually operate. And once you understand that, you can move with more clarity. So if you're navigating your career in the Netherlands and want structured guidance, that's exactly what we do here at Rights, Resumes, and Connections.